Hey there, and thank you for checking out Simple Stagecraft, where we break down and demystify the vast world of technical theater. Today we're going to be looking into painting a little bit. I'm going to show you the brushes that I use with my students, as well as a very basic painting technique. And then the biggest part, cleaning paint brushes. This is something I'm sure a lot of you and your students struggle with, and I hope to help you through it today. First things first. What type of brush should you be using? Well, I'm glad you asked. There are lots of different types of brushes. We're not going to cover very many of them at all. Right now, we're just concerned with flat brushes. That is your very basic house painting brush that has a flat top, as opposed to a sash brush, which gives us this nice angle right here. Don't care about that, and we're not going to worry about this big one. We're not going to worry about this small one. We're not going to worry about these small ones either. We are going to focus on our flat brush and our chip brush. Firstly, we have our flat brush here. It's a very general purpose thing. You've seen it, probably used it for household paints and that kind of thing. It's a little bit pricier as far as, well, compared to this one. It runs about $15 or so. And what it's going to give you is a lot more holding power on that paint and many more bristles, which makes it much smoother of a paint job. This is nice for certain things. In theater, however, I don't really care that much for the most part. This is going to be more expensive and it is going to be more difficult to wash, which, especially if you're working with students, that's going to be not ideal. So, in contrast, we have our chip brush here. Chip brushes are extraordinarily inexpensive. One could even say disposable, but this video is going to make sure that you don't have to dispose of them. They're perfectly washable. I don't know how many times this one's been used, and the bristles are still practically like new. With a chip brush, what you get is it's going to be very inexpensive. You're going to be able to buy these in bulk. That's what I do, buy a whole batch of them from Harbor Freight, Home Depot, wherever. It is almost student-proof as far as washing it out takes a very minimal effort. You can do a variety of textures with these as well. We're not going to get too much into that today. Alright, so whenever I'm painting something, I like to get things in as small of containers as possible. Of course, if you're painting a large surface, you may want a larger container, or if you have a lot of people sharing out of the same container, but I find it makes it easier to break it down and carry it around. That being said, I'm going to take my large can of paint here, and I'm going to pour it into this little cup. Paint is messy, so if you're working on a surface that you don't want to get dirty, like this already very messy workbench, we're going to put down a drop cloth. Once we've got our drop cloth ready to go, we are going to take our paint can opener, and I'm going to open this up. This is already pre-mixed. I've thinned it down a lot. You never want to have fully thick paint in theater because we want to save money, and because it ruins our brushes more quickly, and because it's just a pain in the butt to work with. So I may have another video later on about mixing paint if that's of interest. But for now, we have our pre-mixed paint. I've already stirred it up, so I'm just going to dump it straight into this cup here. If you are adverse to messiness, you may want to get a paper towel or something. I just tend to wipe it off like this. If I've got a drop cloth, that's great. I can wipe it on there. If not, wipe it on my cargo pants. Put this back. And we're done with that. And sometimes your drop cloths aren't big enough and you need to unfold them some more. I also like to have some water handy. For starters, whenever you get a dry brush, if it hasn't been used recently, I would suggest wetting it a little bit. You can do this either by dipping it in some water or just running it under some water. And you want to get most of that off. You don't want a sopping wet brush, depending on what you're doing. But what that does is it takes this little hole in the middle of the brush called the paint well, and it fills it up just a little bit so that the paint can't get quite as far in there, and it's more easy to clean later on. I'm also going to keep this around just in case I want to refresh the brush throughout the process. This is, I would say, where the most problems happen, and that is dipping your brush in, especially the first time, but repeatedly throughout. Sometimes you can get a little overzealous and want more paint, but really, I only need about half of this at the most. I don't want to go past that point. That just gets unnecessary stuff. You're not painting back with this part of the bristles. You're painting right here. So I'm just going to dip this in here. I'm just going to get about that much. That's all I need. Please do not fully dunk your brush into the paint. We're not working on any kind of texture here, so we're going to work on keeping as much paint on our brush as possible so that we can make a base coat over this entire board. All right, so to do that, I'm going to take my paint here, dip it as practiced, just enough in there, and then I'm just going to rotate this around a little bit so that the paint stays on it. It's not dripping. Of course, if I leave it here for long enough, it's going to drip, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to take it right to my board, and I am just going to start slapping it on there. This is a base coat, which means we are just coating the entire thing in a solid color. So I'm going to start doing that just like this. You can see, even though it's a very thin down paint, coverage is just fine. We can see that color very well. Now, aside from cleaning the brush and also getting too much paint on it, the biggest problem I think I have is students just being really, really slow. And you don't have to be slow. This is not fine painting. This is slapping on as much paint as possible, as quickly as possible. So when I dip this in, I'm gonna get some paint, I'm gonna be very generous with my strokes, and I'm gonna move it around as quickly as possible. Try and practice going and painting off of the edge. So what I mean by that is I'm going to take this and I'm just going to paint off this way. If I paint this way off the edge, then that keeps all of the paint on this board here. If I flip this up, you'll see very little paint has made it onto this edge here. And maybe we want that edge painted, but the important thing is that this paint does not get squeegeed off. Because if I get that nice fresh paint and I do this, I've just taken a ton of paint, pushed it off the edge. I'm going to get drips where I don't want them. And we want to avoid that as much as possible. So I'm just going to take my edges and I'm going to brush out like this off of that edge. Same practice applies here. All right, if I was using a separate container, I'm going to return this container, all this paint in this container, back to its original paint bucket. I'm gonna try and get as much out as I can because you do end up wasting a little bit of paint in here, but you know, life's too short to care about that little amount of paint, so I'm not gonna waste too much time doing it. I'm gonna seal this back up using either a mallet or a large piece of wood or my fist, in this case. I'm just gonna use a simple 2x4, seals it up pretty well. All right, so getting started cleaning your brush. Essentials, running water. You need some type of running water. You don't have to have warm water. Cold is just fine. In fact, cold is preferable because the warm water over time will break down the glue in your brush, holding the bristles in, which is not great. After that, we need a bucket of some kind, a small cup perhaps, to fill with water, or just some place where water builds up in the sink. Our sink pools up because it doesn't drain very well, so we'll just use that. Lastly, soap. You need some type of soap. Pretty much any soap will do. We use Murphy's oil soap. That's just what I learned in college. I water it down excessively. There's so much water in here and just a little bit of Murphy's oil. So also, you may want some sort of apron. If you don't regularly wear paint clothes, sometimes you may have some sort of teacher dress code. I highly recommend an apron because while you may be very, very careful while painting and you don't get anything on you painting, the messiest part for me is always cleanup. All right, so we're just gonna turn on the water here and let our bucket fill up enough to dunk the paintbrush into it. We have our brush here. We're just gonna swoosh that in there pretty violently, plunging up and down. And as you can see here, this is gonna get most of our paint out of it. Alternatively, if you have a chip brush or some other cheap durable brush, you can just let the water pool and just jam that into the bottom of the sink. Let it get most of the water out that way instead of having that bucket. And there we go, that's most of it. But we're not quite finished yet. So let's take some soap and really clean this thing out. I'm just gonna put a little bit in the palm of my hand here. And then I'm going to, with this chip brush, since it's short, I'm just gonna rub the chip brush into my hand. Alternatively, you could rub it against the edge of the sink if you wanted, but I find palm to be very tactile and nice. You can also just rub the soap straight into the brush if you would like. I'm just gonna rinse that out, maybe repeat the process a few times. This usually only takes me about 30 seconds in total if I'm doing it in real time. After that, I'm going to run it through the water a little more. I'm going to press that against my hand, and I'm going to pull it in close, and you can see here that that water coming out is completely clear, and that tells you that your brush is clean. So I'm going to shake that out a little bit, turn off my water, and I'm just going to put this up. It's done hanging to dry. All right, so let's see this going down in real time with a nice grimy brush. Of course, the longer you've been painting with a brush, the more dried out the paint is, or the bigger your brush is, the longer it will take. But this usually takes me 30 seconds or less. So first thing we're gonna do is just beat the devil out of it, as Bob Ross would say. We're gonna wipe off anything on that metal there. I'm gonna try and keep it as clean as possible. And that's already looking much better. And then I'm going to take my soap to it, just rub it around in my hand a bit, and I'm going to take some water, rinse it off, rub it around a little more, and then you pick it up. That's perfectly clear, and we have a done brush. Real quick, I'm just going to show you with a more standard flat brush here that it's pretty much the same process. It's just going to take a little longer. I don't like to beat this against the sink, so I'll just plunge it a few times. But then the process is the same. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this helpful. Hopefully you and or your students will not have as many dead brushes that you're going to have to throw away all the time. So if you like this video, please like it down below and subscribe to the channel for more technical theater made more simple for you. Have a good day.